Hi everyone! Today's video is about conflict. I'm your professor, Dr. Jennie Rosier. Let's get started. So communication is goal-directed. That means that almost every time we communicate, we have a goal in mind that we want to achieve. Sometimes this is really in the forefront of our brain, like you're going to your mom to get her to give you some money. And your goal is really clear. Other times, it's not really a clear goal. You're hanging out with your partner and having a conversation. The goal, you're not walking in saying, oh, my goal is to get to know him better or get to know her better. You're just having a conversation and you happen to be also getting to know each other. And that tends to be the goal of those kinds of conversations. But communication is goal-directed, whether it's a super clear, up in the front of your brain goal, or it's in the back, just helping you navigate the world. We all have goals. When our goals are incompatible, conflict happens. And sometimes this is really clear. A lot of times when you're in conflict, you have no idea why you're in conflict. But then other times it's really clear. It's like, oh, he wants to do this and I want to do this, and so we're in an argument about it. Whenever you have incompatible goals, you engage in conflict. And everyone engages in conflict. In fact, it's really unhealthy to not engage in conflict with your romantic partner. Instead, it's not about how often you have conflict. It's about how you engage in that conflict with one another. A lot of times I will ask students, what do you think couples argue about the most? And the answers are different based on if they think I'm talking about a college-aged or young dating couple versus a married couple. In my experience talking with students over the last decade or so, it seems as though the number one things that young people are arguing about in their dating relationships are things like social media, jealousy, and spending enough time together. So one person usually thinks you should be spending more time, and the other person thinks that you're spending enough or you should be spending less time together. Married couples tend to argue about a few different topics, and this also changes based on if it's the beginning of your marriage, if it's when you have young children, or near the end of your marriage. But in general, the most common argument topics among married people are money, sex, kids. I actually wrote an entire book about the arguments that new parents tend to have with one another when they're raising kids. Money, sex, kids, work. So you're working too much or you need to work more for some more money. There goes that money thing. In-laws are another huge thing that people argue about. I think that most people don't realize that when you marry someone, you really do marry their family. And if you don't get along with their family, you're going to have some serious issues down the road. Another thing that people tend to argue a lot about are chores or housework, or maybe not so specifically chores and housework, and more like what you're doing for the relationship and what your partner is doing for the relationship. Here's an interesting research fact for you. Research has shown that about 69% of marital problems are actually never solved. They're just managed. I want you to let that number sink in for a minute. The majority of conflict that you have in marriage is not ever solved. It's just managed. And healthy romantic relationships work really hard at managing this conflict. Sometimes when I tell people this, they get really upset. They're like, wait a minute. I have been fighting with my partner about this one thing for the last 10 years. You mean I'm going to fight about this with them forever? It's never going to be solved? That's terrible. Other times I think it gives people some solace. They think, all right, so I don't have to solve this problem that we face frequently. Instead of trying to solve it, which is often a goal in conflict, we should redirect, we should pivot, and we should try to manage this conflict. There's certain things that two people who have committed themselves to each other are going to argue about for a long time. And power is one of the main things that couples argue about. A lot of things come down to power. One person feeling like the other person either has more power than them or wants to have more power than them, or one person thinking the other person needs to get some more power in the relationship. But there's lots of power struggles in marriage. And I think it's just really important to note that not all conflict has to be solved. Dialectical tensions are things that couples tend to have this push and pull with in their relationships. And so in your workbook, I talked about 4 of these dialectical tensions, and I'll go over each one, but they're autonomy versus togetherness, so this push and pull back and forth between those two, openness and closedness, gender roles, and novelty versus predictability. Autonomy versus togetherness is this tension that couples tend to feel about how much or how little time they should spend with each other, how involved they should be in each other's lives. And there's no right answer here. So with all of these tensions, I'm never actually going to say, here's the perfect ratio of autonomy versus togetherness. There's no right answer. What you do need is to have an agreement with your partner about these things. So you need to agree with each other that this is the appropriate amount of time to spend together. This is the amount of life immersion or world immersions that we'll have with one another. This is how many activities we should probably do together. This is how much alone time I deserve and you deserve. It's not, like I said, it's not about here's the correct amount. It's about you guys needing to agree. As long as you agree, you'll be okay. It's when you disagree about the autonomy versus togetherness tension that conflict can ensue. And so some couples are perfectly fine living their own separate worlds, not involving each other in each other's hobbies or friend groups that often. And other couples, when they get together, they want to be with each other every second of every day. They want to be involved in each other's family lives and friend lives and hobbies and activities and sports and everything. And when you see a couple that has a different idea about this tension than you do, we tend to judge them. I personally would have a problem with both of those couples that I just described. I don't want to spend every second of every day with my partner, and I don't want to live separate lives. You have to negotiate this tension, as you do with all of the tensions, so that the two of you come to some kind of agreement. It doesn't have to be a consensus. It can be some kind of compromise, but you both have to come to some kind of agreement and then check in on each other every so often. Do you think we should be spending more time together or less time together? How are you feeling? Openness versus closedness tension is about how much you think and your partner thinks that you should share information about each other and about your relationship with other people. So how open you should be about your relationship with your partner to your friends, to your mom, to your dad, to your siblings. So how much you should be sharing with other people. And when you are in a heterosexual relationship, I think that this can cause a lot more tension than you would normally think. For example, I do not really think that most men understand how much women tend to communicate about their relationships and their relationship partners to each other. I'm just putting that out there. I don't think they fully grasp it. I remember in the very beginning of my relationship with my husband, we had probably been dating for 2 years. We were at like a Christmas party, and my 2 girlfriends and I were sitting on the couch talking, and we were talking about something, and my husband, he was my boyfriend then, came over and sat next to me, and my best friend said something to the effect of, "Oh, I heard about what happened last week, Wesley. I'm so sorry that happened to you." And Wes looked at me and he was like, "What? What is she talking about?" And it was something kind of personal that had happened to him. And I was just like, deer in headlights. And later that day, he said, "How much does April know about me and our relationship?" And I was like, "Oh, not much. Not much at all." It was then that I realized that he probably had no idea how much I would talk about him and our relationship with my girlfriends. Subsequently, I've learned to pull the reins in a little bit and not talk so much about my marriage or my husband to my friends or to my mom as much as I maybe used to in the beginning, because I realized that it wasn't appropriate. Oh, gender roles. You guys know a lot about gender roles at this point. We did an entire chapter on gender roles and culture. Everybody comes to relationships with different ideas of what men should and should not do and what women should and should not do. Even in same-sex relationships, people come into them with these ideas that this is what I expect a wife or a girlfriend to do, and this is what I expect a boyfriend or a husband to do. And lots of times these ideas are not in line with each other. I want to be clear when I say it's not about you. There's no like right answer here where I say, okay, this is what you should believe about men, and this is what you should believe about women. That's not what I'm here to do. Instead, I want you to know that as long as the two of you agree on the roles that you should and should not be taking on, you're going to be okay. So you just have to be in agreement. I have a friend who has a master's degree. She has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. And when she married her husband, she was finishing up her master's degree and she got pregnant very early on in their marriage. It was their plan, but she had gotten pregnant very early on. And when she found out she was pregnant, she had finished her master's, she quit her job, and it has been 14 years now. And she has never gone back into her career. And a lot of my friends have talked a little smack maybe about her, like, she has a master's degree and she's not using it. What was the point of all that? It's not what she wanted. She wanted to be, and still wants to be, a stay-at-home mom. She wants to have the gender role that she has. Her husband expected it as well. And they're very happy in their chosen, I want to be clear that they're chosen gender roles. I've had conversations with her about it. She is in no way, shape, or form regrets or resents anything or anyone. She's fine. I have other friends who are in a similar boat, not the same, but a similar boat, and do wish that they had maybe done something more for their career or had done something differently so that they could have taken on different roles in their family. And they do feel resentment. But maybe their partner expected them to do these things or life just got in the way. But the fact of the matter is that you and your partner just have to agree on the kinds of gender roles that you plan to take on. For example, just chore gender roles. Chores are a great way to talk about gender roles. So my husband and I take on very traditional gender roles when it comes to chores. I do the dishes, I do the laundry, I do the vacuuming. My husband does the trash, he fixes the cars, he cuts the grass. No surprise here. I'm also in charge of all of the food, so I make all the meals. My husband makes meals sometimes, but I'm in charge of all the meals. And he's in charge of anything that's dirty or nasty or gross. So we take on pretty traditional gender norms. If I was upset about it, there would be a problem. If he was upset about it, there would be a problem. But we're not. We're okay with it. We sat down when we first got married and we're like, I want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't hate doing this. I do hate doing this. And we had that conversation. Talking out your gender role expectations is really important in a romantic relationship. Novelty versus predictability is another tension that couples tend to have conflict over. So this is the idea that we want things to be new and exciting and fun, but we also want to be able to predict what's going to happen next, and we want to have some comfort in routine. And some people lean a little closer to one side of the continuum, and some people are a little closer to the other side of the continuum. And this can cause some serious conflict. Think about it. If you were this carefree, spontaneous person who really liked trying new things, whether it's food or hobbies or activities, and you fall in love with someone who is a bit of a homebody and likes to be in a routine and stay organized and know what's going to happen next and doesn't like surprises and doesn't like to, do things on a whim. This could very easily cause some conflict. So this is a tension that the two of you need to work out early on in the relationship. And sometimes this can be fun to talk about this in conversation. What kinds of things do you like to do on the weekends? That can give you a bit of a clue on what kind of person they are. I don't think that if you are on one end of the continuum and your partner's on the other end that you are incompatible. I don't think that at all. I do think that it can cause conflict and that you both need to be empathetic towards each other's perspective and respect each other's desire for novelty or desires for predictability. In your workbook, I talk a lot about constructive behaviors and destructive behaviors when it comes to conflict. And I even talk about Gottman's 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which, by the way, can definitely predict the relationship ending. If there is too much contempt, for example, the relationship is likely not going to survive very long. But what I want to talk to you about for the rest of this video, you can read the workbook, but what I want to talk to you about for the rest of this video is my 3 phrases for de-escalating conflict. And the reason I want to focus on these is because I know that conflict almost always escalates. I know from personal experience and from the research and from just anecdotal experience talking to my friends and family. Conflict almost always escalates. And so let's say you get in a situation where the conflict is escalating. What are 3 things that you could say to try to bring it down a notch and de-escalate things? The first one is, okay, let's take a 10-minute or a 10-hour break, cool down, and then work towards actually solving the problem. One of the best things to do is to take a break. If things start to get heated, just say, hey, let's take a 10-minute break. Walk away from each other, breathe, calm down. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a conflict with someone, it's escalated, and when the conflict is over, or if I've decided to take a break, or if I walked away from it, I have calmed down and realized, wow, we were fighting over some stupid shit. Like, that was really dumb. And so sometimes you have to calm down to get that logical part of your brain out and thinking clearly and not using the emotional part of your brain that's super angry. You could also say, wait a minute, what are we even fighting about? Sometimes we get into a conflict with someone and we start piling things on, right? It's called kitchen sinking. We're throwing everything in but the kitchen sink, and we're piling things on, but you didn't do this and you didn't do this, and last week you hurt me when you did this and this and this and this, and it's a huge pile, and it's very unclear what you're actually arguing about at that point. And so sometimes you need to say, okay, let's just hold on. What are we actually arguing about here? Let's come up with the one thing that we're actually arguing about. And sometimes that can pivot things. Sometimes that can just redirect the conversation and calm things down a bit. My favorite de-escalation phrase, though, is, hey, I love you and I'm pretty sure you love me. Why are we talking to each other like this? I have said that many times. Especially after I have said something that I didn't mean, or I have said something hurtful. I will usually stop the conversation after I've said the hurtful thing, of course, and say, hey, why are we talking to each other like this? I love you and you love me. And usually a hug follows that conversation or that sentence, and then we can take a breath and have a better conversation and try to calm down the conflict and really get to the root of what we are arguing about. Well, that's a wrap. I'm Dr. Jennie Rosier, Associate Professor of Communication Studies at James Madison University. I'm also the director of the RLH Project. You can find me on Instagram at Relationships Love Happiness or on Facebook at /Relationships Love Happiness. Thanks for watching.